So I'm writing the 4A preview last night, and we have our list of rankings, and I'm going region by region and district by district and kind of looking at teams, the teams that I expect to be at the top. And then every now and then you go, well, wait a minute. These guys are bringing a ton back, and they were pretty good last year.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get to the team that kind of caught my eye.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because I still don't think it's going to matter because of who they're going to have to play in the long run. But I think that happens a lot, right? Like we talk about so often we have over 1,400 schools that we're looking at. And at the end of the day, there's probably about 300, right? 300
Yes.
that you expect to be ultra competitive.
Correct.
And then there's a top tier of those. Teams we're just so used to saying or expecting to be in this position.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that extra 150 on the bottom half that are really good football teams that in some states would win state championships, right?
Mm-hmm.
But because they're in Texas, they're just not going to get their due. And some of these teams might make a run to a state championship, and I wouldn't be surprised. But I also think they're worth pointing out that they're going to be pretty good this year, and they're going to cause teams a lot of problems.
So I took a different tact on this on the phrase off the radar.
Okay, you think that they can make
these
the
are
run.
teams that I feel like are getting overshadowed in the preseason. Are teams that they're
I can put that on these teams.
okay. There's always about three. Look, we talk about the same. I'll give you an example in 6A, okay? We talk about the same kind of handful of contenders in 6A.
Mm-hmm.
Your Cadies, your Allens, your Cedar Hills, your Cibolo Steels, your
Yeah.
DeSotos to a certain extent, your Lake Travises,
Yeah.
your North Shores, your Converse Judsons, Jules Tradies, that kind of stuff. But what we don't talk about are team. But then beyond that, there's that next tier.
Mm-hmm.
That next tier of teams that always tends to have a big impact on how the season rolls on, but we don't talk about enough. And so this was an opportunity. I was like, here are two teams that I think we're not talking about enough. We and just the people at large.
Right.
So you want me to start?
Go for it. We'll go from 6A to 2A.
Okay, we'll start with 6A. 6A, I think that in 6A, we have done a very good job of talking about exactly 3, maybe 4 teams that are making the leap up to 6A. We talked a lot about George Ranch, right? Here we talked about them, just the other day, that George Ranch is a squad without Alex, that brings back Alex Fontenot, they're defending state champions, stuff like that. We've talked about Austin Vandegrift, who was so good last year. Can they replace all the guys that they have? They're losing, like Travis Brannon and company. We talk about Longview. Longview's a perennial power, always towing that line between 5A and 6A. They don't bring a ton back, but they have such tradition and they have such pedigree that you expect them to be there in the end. I'm not sure we've even said the phrase Fort Bend Ridgepoint on this team. Or on the show.
On the show, yeah. I think you may have alluded to it once, and that might be
that
it
might
so
be
far.
it.
Yeah.
But can we stop for a second?
Okay.
And if you believe in third place in the state,
Right.
that is the team that lost the semifinal to the state champion.
Right.
That was Fort Bend Ridgepoint last year. Okay, they lost to Cedar Park in the state semifinal, and they lost in a game that was very close. And you know what? They bring back a lot, especially on defense. This defense is going to be amazing. Okay, Armani Johnson, Dennis Osagide. I've written it about 10 times, but I haven't said it. Osagide. This defense brings back 9 starters for Brent Sniffen's squad. Okay, and oh yeah, by the way, they've got a 2,000-yard rusher coming back in B.J. Rainford. Okay, B.J. Rainford's back. He was incredible. They've got other playmakers like Mustafa Muhammad, who's a giant tight end. Yeah. They got Terry Petrie. This team is loaded, and I think that in the sense that we are. We focus so much on the few teams that make the leap up. Here's this team that has found a way to stay off the radar, and yet, I mean, they have arguably the more favorable draw than a lot of these other teams. This is a dangerous team that is explosive with a good coach and a lot of different playmakers. They've got some holes to fill on offensively, but they've got the guy in Rainford that they can turn to and hand the ball 100 times. So I really like Fort Bend Ridgepoint. I think that they've found a way to stay off the radar.
Yeah, I think that's a really good pick, and I really like your next pick for 5A. Colleyville Heritage.
So very similar to what we were talking about with teams that are dropping down. It's the reverse, okay? Yeah. We have talked ad nauseum about Denton Ryan. Okay? And for good reason.
Obviously,
Denton Ryan was
yeah.
superb.
Yeah.
Denton Ryan was a team that was in a regional final last year in 5A or in 6A, and now brings back most of their squad and is dropping down a classification. Right. That is a very, very dangerous combination. There's a number of other squads that drop down a classification that we've talked about, including Manville, Highland Park. Mm-hmm. And then looming there, and maybe a team that we just haven't paid enough attention to. I think I know why. I'll get into it. It's Colleyville Heritage. You mentioned it. Yeah. I think I know why people are not paying attention to Colleyville Heritage. Because they went 5-6 last year. Okay, yeah. Because they got bounced in the first round of the playoffs. Okay, albeit to Mansfield.
Right.
So that's what we in the business call a good loss.
Yeah.
They got bounced in the first round.
Yeah.
And I think that there's an idea of, okay, well, can a 5-6 team really be that good?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would argue that they were a lot better than their record indicated last year. I think they played in a very difficult district. They went 3-3 in district. They played a very difficult district. Joe Willis always schedules a very difficult non-district schedule.
They got a late start, too, with their new head coach.
Mm-hmm. Joe Willis showed up basically like the day school started and said, hey, I'm your coach.
Yeah.
He showed up, in all seriousness, he showed up in late May, early June.
Right.
I think another reason that it's going to be popular to kind of write them off is that they're losing from a defensive standpoint, and maybe arguably overall, they're losing their most high-profile player, which is Reed Harrison-Ducrest, their cornerback, who played actually when I did the USA football games for ESPN. He was playing on that U18 team, and he was awesome. So
nice.
There's a lot of things conspiring against them, but I don't know. Maybe they've got a 2,300-yard passer and literally, I believe, the state's third or fourth most prolific wide receiver back.
Yeah.
Kevon Ahmad's back for his junior season. 67 catches, almost 1,400 yards, and 18 touchdowns last year as a sophomore.
Mm-hmm.
He's got Camden Roan back in the quarterback spot. And let's not forget, they got 5 starters back on defense, and Joe Willis is a defensive guy. He's a guy who's if you want to compare him to a college coach in Texas, he would be closer to Gary Patterson than he would be Art Briles.
Right.
Okay? He is a defensive guy. Yeah. So when you say, they've only got 4 starters back or 5 starters back, you can say, yeah, but they get the benefit of the doubt because they've got a defensive-minded coach. I think Colleyville Heritage is going to surprise some people. I think they're going to be really, really, really salty this year.
Yeah, I think that's a good pick.
So you were doing the 4A preview.
This is where it all started, right? So I am talking to Coach Matt Cates down at LaGrange, and we're talking about what they need to do to be better this year because last year they had arguably the best running back in the state, J.K. Dobbins, a good team. Lost really early in the playoffs. Who'd they lose to? Wharton. You know how many players Wharton brings back this year?
I don't.
A buttload. 17.
Wow.
And the scariest part about this whole thing is I think Wharton's going to be really good. And you talk to the other coaches in 4A, like Travis Reeve at Cuero and Coach Cates. They're like, hey, Wharton's a good team, right? And they're bringing back all this. And here's why I feel like it's worth mentioning. It may not even matter. Right, because here's what Wharton would have to navigate in Region 4.
Okay.
Navarro.
Tough.
Wimberley,
Very
who's is back on the rise again. Cuero, who I already mentioned, and is probably the prohibitive favorite in that region with all they're bringing back. Oh, and Sinton, who's been great lately, especially. And that's not even to the semifinals, where we expect West Orange Star to be right back there again. Wharton, though, bringing back a ton of people. So then it got me thinking. Let's go down to 3A, right?
By the way, the name to know for Wharton, if you want to be the cool guy around the water cooler.
Oh, yeah.
And those are always the teams. It's Benjamin Baylor. He's kind of their do-it-all running back, defensive back. He's a superstar. He's going to be a D1 commit here pretty soon. Those are the teams. I'm glad you brought that up. Those are the teams that I always they always get my antenna up is when you talk to coaches and they will go,
Boy,
I'll tell you, this team's going to be tough.
Yeah.
Like, don't just write them off.
Yeah.
And those are the ones because they know best because they're the ones who are immersed in their own area. We have to be all over the place, so we can't get microscopic like that. You know, you were talking to Matt Cates at LaGrange, so he can focus on Region 4, and he can look at this, and so he can look at all these teams a little closer and go, that team's got something.
Yeah.
So, I think
that was a close game, too, right? So they beat LaGrange 27-24. Great win, right? Found a way to contain J.K. Dobbins and still get the win. And then they run into West Orange Stark, who is a buzzsaw, and it's not even close. And it may not even be close this year, but I like Wharton to surprise people. I think they'll be even more competitive than they were last year, which was saying something.
8-4 last year, yeah.
So then I'm going back through my interview notes, and I noticed Coach Chris Ketting out at Canadian goes, boy, I tell you, Childress. Childress is the one no one's why. You know what? He's right. Because the first thing you think instinctually in 3A Division 2 about teams that might be able to handle Canadian, you go back to their old rival Cisco, right? A team they're used to facing all the time. And you go, Cisco, that's the team that's going to give them problems. Now, Sonora's out there too. That's another team you have to keep an eye on. But Childress, well, you know what? He's right. 16 returning starters. And there's a lot of reasons to think that maybe people are underestimating what Childress can do. And Coach Sims does a great job. That's another team that I'm sitting there going, we're automatically going, well, this is Canadian's region, right? And if anyone's going to stop him, it's Cisco. And you know what? Childress is lurking back there.
I'll tell you what jumps off the page for me about Childress is this is a team that does the wide open spread offense. Just, spread the ball around the air raid, quote unquote, and they got a 1,000-yard running back coming back. When you've got that coming back, it's a lot easier to find in the air raid. It's a lot easier to find passing and wide receivers and a quarterback, which they have, than it is to find balance. And they've already got the balance in Bo Lott, a 1,000-yard rusher who's back. So I think Childress is an interesting pick out there in Region 1.
So the other thing, it feels like in 2A, everything is sort of preordained, right? Like we really feel pretty strongly that Refugio is the team to beat in Division 1.
Spoiler alert.
And Braymond, by the way, going for three-peat with Roshad Paul. Coach Jeff Kozowski's got a great group coming back still. Lots of kids were juniors last year. We expect them to be the favorites, right?
Yeah, I think they will start the year comfortably in the pole position.
Right. Now, in the past, we'd be like, well, okay, Coach Denny Faith and Albany, they seem like the obvious team that's going to be back there to meet him. Albany loses a little bit more, and some especially key playmakers.
Alex Faith
is gone.
And Drew
is both. They're both gone. That's not great. So I start going, well, who's the team here that might emerge? It's Iraan. Iraan brings back 18 starters from a team that was very good last year.
And, you're exactly right. And they've got that kind of – if you want to buy into Iraan this year, it's easy to do for two reasons. One, they've got the style of offense that works in the playoffs. That bruising, wear you down offense that the game might be 14-13 at halftime, but that thing's ending 31-14 because you're not stopping them in the second half. There's that. The other thing about them is their coach. Mark Kiroff, of course, took the job at Iraan from Falls City, where he took the Beavers to a state title game. And I would say that the talent at Iraan is comparable to the talent that he's got at Falls City, maybe even a little bit better.
I think it might be a little bit better. And the road is more interesting. I think they'll be tested more earlier in the regular season than Falls City usually is by their districts, which I think is a good thing. And I think the regional path that they'll have to take will prepare them more for a potential state semifinal, state championship berth. I just think there's a lot to like about this Iraan group. I'm going to talk to Coach Kerhoff probably today or tomorrow, and I'm excited to see what he says because I think that's another team that you automatically think, Bremond, Albany. Well, this might be the year that Iraan makes a run.
You're exactly right. Good segment, Max.
I thought so.
Great segment. That's some quality. That's some quality producing. Good job. Good job with your producing.